Block 6. Trauma as a wound to the psyche. C. Trauma memory and its effects. As we have seen, traumatic memories are both unconscious and persistent. Therefore, they are difficult to access, and by maintaining information that is no longer relevant, disrupt our ability to remain connected to our natural and social environment through constant adaptation. The symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder can be tracked back to these two characteristics of traumatic memory. These symptoms include 1. Intrusions and flashbacks. Because the experience of trauma is stored as an unconscious memory in the amygdala, events similar to this experience can lead to a sudden and involuntary re-experiencing of the trauma. This out-of-context memory of a past life-threatening event that is not consciously remembered is experienced by the individual themselves and by their social environment as disturbing and absurd, and disrupts the person's relationship with themselves and others. Two. Compulsive reenactments of trauma. The neurologist Robert Scare explains that during a life-threatening experience, hormones can be released that cause short-term anesthesia, and that a person can develop an addiction to these hormones. This may explain the compulsive behavior that can lead those affected to repeatedly reenact situations similar to the traumatic experience. The biophysicist and psychologist Peter Levine believes that compulsive reenactment of trauma contributes significantly to the escalation and repetition of violent acts. 3. Dissociative disorders. Scare explains that dissociative disorders such as multiple personality disorders are related to the freeze reaction with which an individual reacts in a life-threatening situation when fight or flight are not an option. It is a reaction in which the affected person separates from their own unbearable experience to enable survival. This separation can become a habit, and the no longer being present state interrupts the connection that the individual then has with themselves and their natural and social environment. While the symptoms listed here are mostly triggered by one-off life-threatening experiences, there are also similar but more pervasive symptoms that can be triggered by persistent stressful experiences and repeated trauma, particularly in early childhood. In this context, one speaks of a complex trauma or a developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is also associated with mental illnesses such as borderline personality disorder. The medical social worker Christine Ann Lawson describes the symptoms of this disorder, which can be characterized by sudden impulsive psychotic reactions. She distinguishes between 4 different character types, 2 of which tend to commit violent acts. Lawson refers to case studies that show that this disorder has led to extreme acts of violence among those affected, but also among their family members. Peter Levine writes 1997, "Trauma is about broken connections. Connection is broken with the body, self, family, friends, community, nature, and spirit, perpetuating the downward spiral of traumatic dislocation." A direct causal connection between trauma and violence is particularly clear in the symptom of compulsive reenactment of trauma and in borderline personality disorder. Dissociative behavior has a more indirect relationship to violence, as it fails to prevent violent action. In summary, we can say, illustrated by the plasticity of the brain, we find a tendency to be in flow and connected to ourselves and our surroundings. However, this connection can be interrupted by unprocessed traumatic experiences that remain stored in the body as unconscious and permanent memories. This disruption and its various effects can enable and encourage violence. Since this violence can in turn lead to traumatizing experiences, which then allow and/or encourage violence, a vicious circle of violence can establish itself and keep expanding. Lysak and Besersky refer to a study that examined the life stories of 43 men sentenced to death. The study shows that most of them had been subjected to multiple and often severe forms of abuse. This abuse was typically multi-generational and almost always linked to substance abuse. The study makes particularly reference to the relationship between developmental trauma and male socialization problems or violence.